also your research is showing that some of the stereotypes are also played into the way that the news media covers things, because a lot of times the news media also plays into these negative psychology profiles that exist in our community. If every time we turn on the news and we're seeing something from the inner city, it's the negative news, even though we know that there are athletes that are doing good things in those communities. There are business people that are doing good things in those communities. There are people that are doing a variety of things in those communities, but, sometimes the media is just concentrating on the negative aspects of what's happening.
Yes, and, one of my former students, Dr. Valerie Adams-Bass, actually has been doing research. When we talk about racial socialization, a lot of times people think we're just talking about parents, but some of her work is looking at how the media also socialize, right, and gives messages that people swallow. In the absence of, when you have more segregated communities, in the absence of dialogue around issues of race, you also have this absence of learning. And the only tool that you might have to learn about difference is through TV. and we know through even the work in South Africa that was piping in the American show Cops, the negativity towards, Americans and Black Americans, even in South Africa, was defined by this show, right? And so how is it that our media currently, leaves out the stories and narratives of people of color? And so, to that end, the media matters, and it's also important to combat. So the skills of seeing, and using a good defense, as it were, seeing when the media is stereotypical, also needs an offense to speak up against that media socialization when it is about white supremacy or racial inferiority of others.
And what are some of the ways that you encourage some of your people to fight these media stereotypes? Do you encourage them to write letters to the media if they're seeing that the media is only covering, say, the crimes that the teenagers are doing or those stereotypes? Or do you encourage them to try to actually have conversations with their media reporters, whether that's the African-American reporters or whether that's the white reporters that are there that are covering that community? What are some of the ways that you are encouraging people to fight these stereotypes?
Well, and I forgot to mention Dr. Valerie Adams-Bass at the University of Virginia, and some of the work that I think fits within the racial socialism frame is like even when you're watching television with your children, asking questions, what do you see? Does that make any sense? You notice what happened, as a way to have children be prepared to be both conscious of what's going on when they're being told or shown something, and that they have a right to agree or disagree with it, rather than just swallow it or be entertained. So those skills, I think, can start young. But as you get older, certainly speaking up against it, writing letters in the context of teaching, teaching students. How do you teach students to be critical thinkers with whatever they get, and be able to speak your voice is connected to academic achievement, So how do you learn to speak your voice against racial inferiority? Writing, but using your voice.
Yeah, because that's one of the things that I know that we've had other guests on before that have talked about this before, that have the belief, and I've heard this from educators, that you shouldn't introduce kids into like these deep thought kind of things too early because their brains aren't developed enough. I've heard this kind of like thought, and it's one of them Kool-Aid things in my opinion, but because I know my parents and my dad I have no kids of my own, but I have two nephews, and when they were like 1 or 2, maybe even before that, my dad was going around showing them things in nature and, pointing things out, and they seem to internalize some of that and seem to be doing well in school and things of that nature. And I think part of that is because he was doing that at a very young age. But I do know that some people will tell you, if I even bother doing that because, their brains aren't developed, they won't actually get any of this knowledge until they turn whatever that age that they believe that the brain is fully developed. But it seems to me that that's almost defeating the purpose because part of the brain, even is growing, is that it needs to be developed as it's growing. So I never understood that argument, but I have heard that argument before.
Yeah, I've heard it too in different ways. Sometimes when we go around the country to speak, and I've run into folks who ask, parents who are concerned, will say, well, isn't talking about race to your children making them even more racist? Some people will ask. White people will ask mostly. And other people will ask, well, isn't this, regardless of racial background, isn't it burdening our children with our stuff, adult stuff when we say these things to them? And I say to them, my conversations with children, they told me stuff about what parents might say to them that's scary, and I said, it's funny that some parents will say things to kids that are scary that they don't question, but racial stuff somehow they question. And so I say, I asked a group of fifth graders, do your parents ever say anything scary to them? And then when I was in Chicago school, and they said, yeah, they say to us, don't talk to strangers and don't talk to strangers with candy. And I said, well, any strangers ever come up to you and offer you candy? They said, no, but we're real prepared for it, So, kids will say, parents will tell children some very scary stuff out of protection. But we need to, for some reason, we think burdening them with issues of race is somehow different. And I think that's a wrong notion. If you're preparing your children for things, you prepare them in ways that they can understand, and that you're going to protect them, and this is one of the ways you do it.
And it's not just issues of race. I remember, here in North Carolina, we've had two issues in the last 5 or 6 years that dealt with the LGBT community. One was Amendment 1, and the other one was the famous bathroom bill. But when Amendment 1 was going around, which was supposed to give more equal protection and everything to that nature, and it was listed as, on the polls and everything, at the time I was dating a young lady, her daughter was a teenager at the time. She's a young adult now in her 20s, but at the time she was a teenager, and she was actually letting her mom know that her mom was very much adamant that, she did not want to support anything that was pro, quote unquote, the gay community and everything. Her daughter was like, look, I might even have some of these kind of feelings and things of my own, and I think that you should support it. And they actually were almost at odds with each other for a minute over that and everything. So it seems to me that she should have been listening to her daughter a little bit more and listen and, not trying to just disregard her because she was a teenager. But sometimes some of our parents just want to disregard the teenager because it's not the belief of whatever that social group that you belong is, whether that's the church group, whether that's the fellow parts of the household or whatever. But sometimes we seem to want to disregard the teenagers, even though they are students and trying to make decisions of their own as well.
I mean, we have to understand youth autonomy in making choices. But I think even if you disagree about these issues, can you talk about it? Right. And can you prepare to talk about it, even if you disagree? We've lost the art of debate, and I think teaching young people how to debate, that is, you speak up for yourself, but you also listen. You must listen to be a good debater. Right. Also to challenge someone's argument. You can't do it without knowing the positions and listening to the positions. And otherwise, you're just spitting on each other. And go ahead.
I was just thinking, a lot of times it seems like we've got to the point of not even, as you just put it, you mentioned critical thinking and debating, but you're right. So often, good debates was about whether it was William Buckley against even like James Baldwin or somebody. At least they would listen to each other and would, hear each other's point of view. At the end of the debate, they might not agree at all, or they might move each other a little bit to one side of the barometer or another based on what the arguments were and everything. But a lot of times they still were stuck on the same beliefs that they had before the debate, but at least they were willing to listen to each other and to try to learn from each other. But now it seems like everybody just kind of wants to give their viewpoint without really listening to the other's viewpoint as well. And that's part of what, as you just said, a good debate is about, is listening to folks and actually learning. And that even in the school systems, I don't know that there was a time that debate clubs were definitely popular. I'm thinking about like there was a movie that was out back that was very popular and showed the history of the debates back in the 50s and back in that era. But the Great Debater, I think it was called, or something like that. But but it seems like we've gotten away from these kind of like true understanding of each other. And like you said earlier, it's you're on different sides of the issue. Doesn't mean that you can't at least have the conversation, and it doesn't have to be this whole concept that we've got into with Facebook of unfriending each other because we don't like what your view is, or they don't like what your view is, or vice versa.
Yeah. And I think you could argue that you need debate. I think it should be a lesson that kids get, a skill that they learn by 6th grade. You could argue that you'll need debating for the rest of your life, and also how to stand up for yourself in partner relationships.
Right.
To be able to listen and debate and stand up for yourself. You know how that is. Both men and women struggle with, swallowing what they really feel, and then it comes out in a way they don't really appreciate, or nobody appreciates, or you're silent about it and you swallow it and you get angry. And you don't have to be right. You just have to stand up for your position sometimes so you're not humiliated. And that, I think, you already know. We all could learn those skills.
Because it seems like sometimes, even in like you just mentioned, even in relationships, a lot of times folks just want to almost avoid debate these days. They almost like want to find ways to avoid having any sort of semblance of any sort of disagreement, and sometimes they'll even go into various forms of hiding or internal hiding in order to avoid those confrontations, even though those confrontations can actually make the relationship a healthier relationship.
Yeah.
If they're disagreeing with each other and keeping all of that disagreement and anger internalized, that seems to me like you're just having a recipe for a boiling point at some point, and that's not going to be pleasant.
Yeah, absolutely.
Too often we have too many people that just seem to want to leave that stuff pent up in themselves and not really get into the concept of what their disagreements are. And like you said, they need to do that. And one of your other programs that I just wanted to get to before we close out the show, and I definitely want folks to find out how they can learn more about some of your research and where they can find the research at. But you had this program called, I believe it was Play, and I wanted to know a little bit more about what that was all about.
Yeah, we actually, part of it was I used to play semi-professional soccer when I was going to graduate school. And part of the process in playing soccer was that there were often fights that would break out and in the middle of the soccer game, and that's just part of life. But I was always in the middle of them trying to break them up. And I think that taught me a lesson that when I got closer to young people or to my teammates in a lot of ways, I found out emotionally they didn't want to fight. So when we're working with kids on the playground, we realize that basketball is one of those sports that you can learn a lot about someone's strengths and weaknesses while they're playing. Right. So a lot of the students that we work with in discipline schools, and again, because of bravado and macho, will get into these moments in which they have to fight when they really don't want to fight. And so we just thought that the basketball is a nice playground to understand when kids are stressed, what are they likely to do? What are their strengths and their weaknesses? And we can use those lessons, what we know about the students, for not only what happens on the court, but what also happens in the classroom and what happens in street corners. So if you show me who you are on a court, I can figure out more about how you will navigate challenges off